This is the Town of Washington Historical Society meeting held on Thursday, April 18th in the year 2002 at 7:30 p.m. at the Lyle Memorial Federated Church. Our subject tonight is one-room schools. And we have with us former school moms, Edna Tilsley, and others such as Sally O'Brien, Dorothy Burdick, and Nancy Lundgren. And Nancy's mother, Dorothy Birch, instituted hot lunches at the Shady Dell School. There should be an exhibit of class pictures and photographs of one-room schools from this area. We hope to have a very wonderful evening of nostalgia.
The very nature of what made America so great. A few years ago, there was a book published, and there are lots and lots of them, America's Country Schools. And what made America so special is the fact that right from the get-go, from Thomas Jefferson on, education was part of the American commitment to its citizens. Believe it or not, no other country did that. That was unique. Thomas Jefferson had it written into the Constitution, not the Constitution, but into government policy, that as the country expanded west, Northwest Territory, the creation of states, automatically every single section would relegate certain parts of the property for the creation of schools. And the taxes that would be generated would help support it. So from 1812 on, America made a commitment to public education. In some places, like New England, there had been a tradition already in place of public schooling. But throughout much of the country, that wasn't the case. In New York State, just about 1812, 1814, there were a series of enactments created establishing one-room schoolhouses. And by 1820, the law in New York State was that no child should have to walk more than 3 miles to attend school. And what that meant was, generally speaking, there'd be a one-room schoolhouse every 6 miles. You think of it, because 3 miles one way or the other. Now, sometimes the 3 miles was quite a hike, because it might be up and down a hill or over pastures and so on. So in some cases, schools were closer together. One of the earliest schools in the town of Washington, and we should be very proud of it, is of course the Nine Partners School. That was a Quaker school. And one of the first published books, public school book, was actually created there by the Willets, and many of you know the Willets family. This happens to have come from the Haight family. It's an 1830 edition of bookkeeping by Jacob Willets, so that you could actually learn how to log and register names and dates. Now, what's fascinating about this little book is the fact that all the names, Swift, Lane, and so on, these are people in our community. So the ledger accounts are actually based on actual ones. This will be up here for you to see. Now, where does that bring us today? Well, it brings us right here. One-room schoolhouses, public education, and this extraordinary opportunity that we as Americans had to go to school. Now, think in your own families what that meant. My great-grandmother was a Wappinger Indian, and in Putnam County. 6th grade, she was the first one in her community and her family that went to school through 6th grade. And then she dropped out, because most of the people didn't go beyond 6th grade. My mother went through 8th grade, and she was so proud of the fact that she made it through 8th grade. My generation graduated from high school, 12 years. And in my family, I was one of the first ones to go to college. Now, we look around, think about your own families in that situation. What public school gave us, gave our families, gave our communities? A few years ago, the Thorne Building had its memorial celebration. And by school year, we divided up for graduates, and we had a parade. Some of you were a part of that. And I realized I made a mistake when we set that up, because we were looking at it from the year that you graduated. And if you graduated in 1923, 1928, 1930, you could come and get in the float. And I looked out and realized that a number of people were standing on the sidewalk who went to that school, but not on the float. Why? Because they dropped out at 16. Why? Because they had to work. I shouldn't have said those who graduated, but those who attended the school. You know? That was my own mistake, because I'm so accustomed to people graduating. But in this generation, your generation, we've seen a world of changes. I'm teaching now. Most of my students automatically assume, yeah, I'm going to college. And I ask them, what are you going to study? Oh, I don't know, but I'm going to college. Having said that, let's go back to where this all started, one-room schoolhouses, and what those one-room schoolhouses did for our community. Now, we have a little note, two very special people here, and they are Edna Tilsley, and she's going to be talking about her experiences. And we also have Rosamond Fowler, who taught in a one-room schoolhouse. And they're going to share some of their stories, and I'm going to act, because I'm a teacher, I'm going to act as the moderator, so that I'll throw out questions and you'll have questions too, so we can get the conversation going. And please, we'll all jump in. And with that, Edna, would you like to stand up and pretend you're back in school again?
What class? Are you going to, you want me to?
Would you like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring this over, Edna. There you go.
You have a chair over there?
Can
Yeah, very good. We'll bring the other. So the two of you come here, sit down.
Just get up for a minute. Yes, right, yes.
This is one of the compensations of old age.
Please, sit down.
All right. How do you want us to do this, David? You want me?
Now, think about when you first started teaching, and where the school was, or what it was like, what your, as a teacher, what your memories are.
Well, I went to a one-room school too.
Okay.
So that should,
Sure.
chronologically, I should do that.
Sure. Wonderful.
I was born in White Plains and grew up there, and my family moved to the outskirts at one time near a little place called Rosedale. Any of you who know Westchester County maybe know that. And I went to the one-room school there. I was about 7. And are you doing that to me? Oh, excuse me. I had a mile and a half walk.
And how large was the class? How many students?
Pardon?
How many students would you say?
Well, you know, long-term memory is supposed to be good, but both my short and long-term memory. I can't remember. That was a long, long time ago.
Okay.
I was about 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I shall never forget my first day there, because I went into school and immediately was surrounded by a bevy of big girls they were. And this teacher had assigned them to orient me to school, and to do a spelling lesson. Well, they ripped off all of these names, all of these words. The only one I could spell was apt. A-B-T. But that happened right along. As I think back about the teacher, I don't think she was happy there. I don't think she was fitted for it, because most of her duties, or many of her duties, were handed over to the older children to teach the younger ones. I don't remember her ever spending any time with me, but I was very eager to learn, so I finished my assignments, and I learned a lot from the children from the other groups just as you've mentioned previously, that you learn both the preparations and the end. But I must say, the room it was a one-room school. And we had outhouses, no inside the facilities at all. And 2 boys were selected by a week to go to the next door neighbor's well and get a pail of water and bring it back to school, and we had the dipper. We all survived. We had, well, I mentioned that we had 2 outhouses, one for the girls, one for the boys. The recess periods were very poorly supervised, if at all. So most of the little girls spent most of their recess time in the outhouse because the big boys chased them there. And the teacher had never had anything to do with the recess. It's just amazing how unsupervised we were. As I said, I had now a 1.5-mile walk. In the wintertime, we had neighbors across the way whose big girl went there, and then they would let me ride with them in a sleigh beside the horse with a big buffalo robe over. And that was really quite fun to do that. I don't remember of any supervision at all, or anyone coming out from the White Plains school system, although it was under that system, to see what we were doing. At the end of the 3rd grade, the students then went up to a school called the Mamaroneck Avenue School, and we'd take the trolley. So besides walking the 1.5 miles, then I would go and get on the trolley and go up to school. And heaven forbid if you left your lunch on the trolley, as I did one time, and I thought the world was coming to an end. But I had a wonderful teacher whose name was very appropriate. Her name was Lucy Learn. And she dried my tears and said, well, she lived in a boarding house, and she said, you can come and have lunch with me. And my mother had said, when this happened later, she said, she would want to pay for my lunch. She said, oh no, my meals are paid for ahead, so I can bring someone once in a while when I don't make up for when I'm not here. So that isn't much to remember about this school, but that was such a long time ago. I don't think I can give you any more, but if you want to ask questions, I'll try to rake up something. Not make up, rake up.
And when you went off and decided to be a teacher, was that because of your experiences in the one-room schoolhouse? What motivated you to become a teacher?
No, I really wanted to be a lawyer. And I graduated. I lived in the Depression, and there wasn't money for that length of education. So although I had thought about teaching as well. It wasn't just to fill in.
And did you go to a normal school?
Yes, I went to New Paltz.
New Paltz. Okay. And was it for 4 years or
No,
2
it was
years?
3.
3 years.
But then afterwards I went to graduate school and took more courses.
And your first teaching job, was it here, or did you teach somewhere else before you came here?
No, someplace else. So that when I graduated in 1933 from New Paltz, in the midst of the Depression, there were only 2 ways that the graduate could get a job. One, if the person had previous experience, and the other would be if you had influence with the school board. Well, there were more trustees than boards because of the country schools. There's still a lot of country schools then. I had neither, and it was ironic because I was both president and valedictorian of my class, but I had no job.
So when you came here, what school was it that you taught at?
I taught at the primary school, which is now the town hall on Reservoir Drive.
And how many teachers were in that building?
Only 4 of us.
And it covered what grades?
1, 2, 3, No, I can't remember.
Kindergarten,
It was kindergarten, first, second, and third. That was it. People remember.
Yes.
I have a question
Yes.
to our audience. How many of them went to that building? Quite a few. How many had Mrs. Tilsley?
I John Kennedy.
6, okay.
Mrs. Oldtown.
Oh, okay. What were some of the other names of teachers who worked with you?
Singer, Mrs. Finger, wasn't it?
Miss Pingree, she was
Mrs.
taught
Finger?
kindergarten.
Kindergarten, yep.
And Betty Hardy, she was a very dear friend of mine. And Marion McCall. I think that was about it.
Okay.
But then I want to tell you about my, unless you don't want me to go on this,
No, no,
way I
please.
taught at
Yes.
the country school.
Please do.
I told you I had no influence and I had no previous experience, so I didn't have a job. So I was home for a couple of months, and of course it didn't look well for the school to have me jobless. So they got in touch with me and said if I would come back and take about 10 weeks of some rural courses, that undoubtedly something would come up. So my father said, well, all right, I'll stake you to that. And I said, no, I'm going to take out a student loan. And that way I may be more likely to get something when it comes up. So I went back for 10 weeks and took the rural courses that were given at the time, which really were a great help because they were mostly organization of classes, because you never knew how many grades you were going to have or how many were going to be in each grade. So that school was up in Schoharie County. Are any of you familiar with Schoharie County?
Mm-hmm.
And Cobleskill, this was the Cobleskill School District. They were ahead of their time in as much as they had centralized, and they had a lot of outlying in those country schools. And I was in the one, must have been, it seemed a long ways, maybe it was only 3 or 4 miles, in a little hamlet called Doraloo. Anybody here ever hear of Doraloo?
No.
It's a very unlikely name. Well, Doraloo consisted of 4 corners, and there was a general store which housed the post office, and had a gas not a station, just a pump next to it, and a church that was about 2 houses from where I lived, and that's all there was there. The schoolhouse was down a little road off the main road. The main road was the only street in the town, and Lisbon wasn't a town; it was a hamlet. And when I went up for my interview, it was winter, January, because I did get a job after the 10 weeks. And I was interviewed by the board. They had a board of education, and my boyfriend at the time was the one who drove me up. It was a long, hard drive up there, and the board, the 3 austere-looking men, knew that, and so they said to me, "Are you planning to get married?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, if you do, that terminates your job. No marriage teacher." And I found that I was replacing a married woman, but she was giving up because her eyes were affected and she couldn't manage it anymore. Well, this was a 2-room school because it evidently had more pupils. Before it was centralized, of course. They used 2 rooms. We used just the one. And at the end of 6th grades, then they would be bused into the Cobleskill School. We went up the scale a bit. We had chemical toilets inside. We still have the outside outhouses, though, to chase people into. The school room was heated with a great big stove. I had a wonderful old gentleman who was the janitor. He was there bright and early every morning and had the stove going and the room heated. But in the wintertime, we had 2 cloakrooms where one of them had the boys' chemical toilet and one the girls'. But it was so cold in the winter there that they couldn't leave their lunches there, so we had to stack the lunch boxes and bags all around the stove, keep the sandwiches from freezing. Occasionally, some of the mothers would very kindly come in and or bring over hot cocoa for the children. There was, as I said, the 6 grades, but of course they weren't divided into grades that way. That's one thing you learned about in the rural courses, about consolidating classes and combining many things. I don't remember what we did about water. Maybe if someone brought in by that time they probably would have had the big water jugs, but I don't remember ever sending anybody for a pail of water. The boys would have loved it because they could get to slosh their way back to the school. We had recess too, and it was a difficult time because there were always some of the older boys who wanted to be king of the heap always. Let's see what I have here much. Oh, the children, I don't ever remember having any disciplinary problems. The children mostly came from very poor farm families. There were maybe about 4 who were not of those. They really were very poor. And but the school was a great treat. They loved to come to school because it was sort of a harbor for them. And even on Saturdays, because I lived right there in the middle of town, they wanted to do things on Saturdays. So I very often did spend that part of Saturdays with them. And I can remember one thing especially, we did go down to the brook. And that's what they learned about a delta, making a delta. And I did have other problems than disciplinary. I had one boy who came from a poor, I think the family was a Polish family. His mother and father did not speak English. That boy would not go to the lavatory, to the bathroom, toilet, I should say. He just sat in his chair or in his seat and wet his pants all the time. All the varnish was off his seat. And at that time, the teacher was, you were the nurse, you were the psychologist, you were the mother to a lot of them. And a supervisor from the Cobble school system would come out periodically, not always on the same schedule. And of course I reported this because it was getting to be very offensive. And nothing you could do. He was a stalwart little fellow, and you couldn't move his mind or his body. So anyway, the superintendent came out with a new pair of trousers for him, and he thought that would appeal to him and that would motivate him to be it didn't make a bit of difference. So there was nothing you could do. You just had to put up with this kind of thing. And then I had another family. Really, I don't know how I could explain to you. The father could talk. He couldn't really write, although he tried to. But they were the kind of family that, this is actually true, that sewed their children's underwear up for the winter. And of course you can imagine how uncomfortable, how terrible that was. And the children who sat around these 3 children, of course, began to complain and make remarks. And the father very imposing-looking, rough-looking man, came into school one day with a note and handed it to me. And all the note was said in words that I could decipher from his thing. If you don't stop these kids from taunting my kids, I'm going to call the troop on you. He meant the trooper. Well, there wasn't anything you could do about that really either. You couldn't. These days you would be able to.
I'm going to have to bring your talk to a halt, so we can have Rosamond's, and then we have about 6 other schools or more to go.
Oh my, I'm sorry.
So, it's been wonderful.
No.
I realized the time is slipping by. Is there something you wanted to wind up with?
Well, other than this came to an end because I I was offered a job in Millbrook, and that's how I happened to live, that's how I happened to come here. Down to civilization again.
And we're so happy you came here.
good.
Wonderful.
What grade did you teach in Millbrook, Edna?
What?
What grade did you teach in Millbrook on Reservoir
When I first
Drive?
came here, I taught second,
Second.
and then when the new school was that I was married and couldn't teach then, and then when I went back, I taught first until I retired.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Now, Rosamund Flower, what are your experiences and where did you go to school?
Well, I was born into a family of teachers on my father's side. I don't know how, he had three sisters, all became teachers. His mother was a teacher. His father was a teacher until he had to stop teaching and go and serve in the Civil War. When he returned from the Civil War, he was given some other sort of job, but anyway, the Wardills were teachers with no question about it. That's what they were. And I loved it, and I looked forward to it, and my sister did not, like I did, but still was sent to State College in Albany when she was 16, and went ahead and finished her course in college and promptly got married. And the Depression had already begun, and married women didn't get to be teachers. So that that was one Wardell who had escaped from being a teacher. I went to New Paltz and went for 2 years, and at that time you could get a pretty good certification for teaching. And I was fortunate to be hired to teach in a one-room school in LaGrangeville. It was exactly what I wanted to do. And the children, I think there were 12, except that occasionally people would move in or out. They were usually farm laborers who didn't own their home, but had a home because they had a job on a farm. And I just loved it. But I became a little bit restless. Oh, I went back for summer school so as to get more credit for New Paltz. And there also were extension courses from NYU that came to Poughkeepsie and gave extra, and you could get extra credits that way. So by 1931, I think, I became a full postgraduate of New Paltz, which was nice. And I then switched to a school called the Foreman District on the Salt Point Turnpike. That was a larger school. That was quite modern. We had running water, we had bathrooms, we had a furnace. I was the only teacher, though. We taught, I think, from the first grade to the 6th grade. And it became quite a lot of interest in consolidating. And by the time I had taught there the 3rd year, the school was already combined with the Arlington district. That didn't please me at all. I did not want to teach in a big school. I wanted to teach in a one-room school. And meanwhile, I had become engaged to the man who became my husband. And at that time, it was absolute perfect timing. I couldn't teach if I got married. I think if anyone had made a real fuss about that, that could have been set aside. But anyway, it suited my husband to be and me, and that was the end of my teaching career. But I did love it, and I loved the children, and I still hear from some of them. And as far as I know, when they went on from the 6th grade into the 7th grade, which at that time they went to Arlington, they all seemed to have taught to learn enough to do perfectly well, and adjust to a big, at that time, Arlington school wasn't very big, but it seemed to suit the requirements of getting into a bigger school. And
1912 in New York State, there was a movement to consolidate districts. And the reason was, the belief was that the small independent school couldn't offer the kinds of courses and selection of courses that you needed for the modern age. This is before World War I. And there was a move. The Thorne Building was unique in that it offered not only the academics, but it offered courses in domestic arts. You could learn to sew, you could learn to cook, girls of course, and the boys could learn blacksmithing. They had an actual forge, the little building that's beyond the school, so that was a useful craft. Horseshoes, you learned how to make a horseshoe because in 1905, 1906, horses were the main form of transportation, so that was a useful skill. You learned how to make bird houses, you learned simple carpentry. At the time the Thorne Building did that, it was very progressive. In 1911, 1912, New York State started encouraging smaller schools to consolidate so that they could offer courses like that throughout the state. So from 1911 on, consolidation was one of those words that every district, every school heard. But it didn't stick very easily because most people didn't want to give up their autonomy. They didn't want to give up their own community. And in a rural school system, the one-room schoolhouse represented that community. You give that up and you go to a bigger school, you lose your identity. And a number of schools, one-room schoolhouses, lasted through the 1950s and in some places even as late as 1960, 1961. It depended really on where you were. In the 1950s, Millbrook, if you read the paper, and many of you experienced it, went through a tremendous battle in terms of the consolidated district and organizing and building a new school. And there was tremendous hard feelings on all sides about whether or not that should take place. A question I have for you is, many of you went to one-room schoolhouses, of course. How many of you went to one-room schoolhouses in the 1930s? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. How many of you went to one-room schoolhouses in the 1940s? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. How many of you went to a one-room schoolhouse in the 1950s? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
David, the reason I'm coming up is I know Stan's going to take over in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
I know from talking to him that those are going to be some discussions.
Okay.
So maybe this is a good time for Stan to move in, for us to thank you for your history, for get our ladies back to a comfortable place to sit if they'd like to move back, or you may just stay.
No, stay right there. Stay there.
Stay right there. Now, Stan, are you going to need some walking space here?
I can move around here, I'll be all right.
May I be allowed to make just one comment in favor of the plus side of the one-room schools? The children did learn civility. There was much more civility in those days than now. And they learned to watch out for the younger children. They learned to respect each other and what each other could do. They took each other as they were. Maybe that didn't happen every place, but that was my experience. And they had a lot of good training for just living. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. My brother Stan Benham and I started a couple years ago finding old schoolhouses and studying up on some of the details. I'm just going to let him take over and hopefully
Well, this part of the program, we hope to get some audience participation. And I think we can have some fun with that. In that vein, I will start out with about a 60-second story about arithmetic. A young entrepreneur had increased his business to the point where he needed a full-time accountant. So he advertised in the paper. Thursday morning, they were all waiting when he opened the store, and he interviewed them all morning long. No luck. In the afternoon, he started. The first man he interviewed, he hired on the spot. He said, "That's the man I've got to have." Now, when he interviewed him in the morning, he asked about 3 questions. The first question was always the same. How much is 2 and 2? Well, some said 4, some said 2 and 2 is 4, others would say 2 and 2 is 4. He wasn't happy. So what was the difference? In the afternoon, he asked the man, how much is 2 and 2? The man got up, calmly, he walked over, he locked the door, he pulled down all the shades on the windows, and he said, what would you like it to be? So what I plan to do is start with the school, tell you what little I have information on it, you may know about it, then ask for some audience participation. And I know some of you have some stories. If you went there, you maybe know where you got the water, or the games they played, or whatever. And I like to start with the night school. Is Dorothy Barton here? Well, now there goes the best laid plans, right off the bat. I think she's the Stanfordville historian. She went to school, and I talked to her, and I thought it was quite interesting what she told me about it, so I asked her if she could come, that would be nice, and she could talk to it. Well, she didn't make it, but I remember what she said. It's a school that happened to be about a good driver and a 9-iron for our house, so Stanfordville had centralized at that time. So we only knew the couple who lived the store, and the school. We often wondered about it. So she gave me a picture, and she said, well, there's my father and my mother and my mother's sister. And she said she talked a lot about that school, and her parents said, you know, the boys didn't get to school very often. They were all farm boys around there. Some came from the town of Washington. And she said they had to husk corn in the fall, and so when they came, they came. It was November. Then the teacher got the folder out and found out where they left off. But the parents knew they had to have an education. They knew that. Some of the parents maybe couldn't read or write, so they knew it was important. And I know Frank Barton, and here, he looks pretty old there. But she said, you know, if the boys were 22 and they got through, they got through. That's what was important. And when the ground thawed out and it was time to plow, you didn't see them again either. And she also said, one Saturday a girl asked her mother to go back to school. She left a book, and she never returned. So people began to look for her, and they found her in the back of the school. She had raised a window to get in, and probably when she started in, the window came down right on her neck, broke her neck, and that's where she found her. And she was dead at that time. Okay, I don't know if anybody else has anything about that school. It's a joint district, Stanfordville and town of Washington. Now, I'm going to be looking at notes here occasionally. You bear with me, because likewise, my short-term memory took a vacation. And I took an extended one. I don't think it's ever coming back. Shunpike, Fitch's Cornered School. Now, what I know about it is, I've talked to Floyd Chadwell and got some information. And I think of Paul Harvey. The rest of the story? Fitch's Corner School. Now, if you talk to enough people around, you find out it's really Chadwell University. If you really want to know, if you were 70 years ago, if you were walking around, you'd ask the kids. All the kids know. It was Skunk Hollow Junior College. So now you know the rest of the story. And there were, let's see, I've got a little note here on that. Costine family, 6 went to that school. 6 Chadwells, 4 Potters, and a Charlie Barrett. I think that name must be significant. Somebody may know what it means. Floyd says his teacher was Mrs. Andy Hammond. The Hammonds lived on the Raleigh farm at the time. Another teacher was Miss Sutherland and Miss Moore. And he said that Miss Sutherland was 18 when she taught there, and then she left and went to Weepatuck and taught for 62 more years. Floyd said occasionally he'd take the horse, come to school. Sometimes they'd hook it to a sleigh. Other times they walked when snow was deep. They could see 6 inches of the fence post on top. And one item he mentioned was that those days they got 5 cents for a woodchuck. So they would bring their rifles, so they'd leave them in the corner of the schoolhouse. Now, probably wouldn't do that today. Teacher knew about it. On the way home, they shoot woodchucks, 5 cents a woodchuck. Now, anybody else on Chadwell University? Yes,
My grandmother taught school there,
that's right.
and she boarded across the road at the Sackett Spur House. For as long as she taught there, I don't know how long she taught.
And you know what's funny? My grandmother taught me too. Okay, you can reverse it. My grandmother taught at the Shunpike School. That's in the middle of the Shunpike. She taught 3 schools, but we'll get to that later. Yes, she did teach there. Okay. Yes.
Because I don't know any of these schools that you're talking about. Can you tell us about how many one-room schoolhouses there were in Washington?
There are about 16. Some were joint districts, but probably about 16. And I think there's about 14 of them still around. I took a picture of the one on the Tower Hill. Just as you start up Tower Hill, there was a schoolhouse. It's on a 1667 map. It's not there
Moved
anymore.
up the hill now, hooked on a house.
Oh, some kind of house? Oh, somebody knows about
My house.
it. Okay, well, good. We'll get to that pretty soon then. Okay. Now, in the middle of the Shunpike, we got a schoolhouse on the east end, one on the west end, and one in the middle. And the one in the middle, I guess that was just called Shunpike School. Lois Cook went there, and she sent us some information, a picture of her in front of it in 1937. So we have 3 pictures. One, 1898, with my grandfather's horse, Old Dick, standing in front. He was courting my grandmother. Lois Bowman stands in front of this, 1937. Here's the latest. So the schoolhouse is in good condition. My grandmother was 16 years old when she was teaching. Now, does anybody have any information on the school? All right, now we got another schoolhouse at the west end. And I don't know if many people know about that one. That was there quite a while. And Marshall Knapp was trustee. At that time, I think, as you mentioned, most of them were trustees. They didn't have school boards. And it was a job that required hiring a teacher, making sure the school had the maintenance, the fuel was there, and that sort of thing. Probably people were working 6 to 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. I don't think they jumped at the job. Some of them volunteered, but I imagine in many cases it was thrust upon them. You know, you're a pretty good, strong man. You got it, like it or not. And in that vein, I got there's a book on the Mills family, and in it they quote something that my father had said, and it does refer to a trustee, and he refers to Uncle Bert. Now that was Albert A. Birch, who owned and ran the store across from the Millbrook Bank. And since the book is about the Mills, it says Stanley Benham wrote for his posterity. Steve Mills was quite a forceful character. I remember your Uncle Bert telling at the time when he was going to a school where Uncle Steve was a trustee. He said that the teacher probably was a rather poor stick. One day Uncle Steve evidently came to that conclusion as he appeared at the schoolhouse, fired the teacher, threw a pail of water into the stove to put the fire out, and told the children to go home. Now he's a forceful person, you know, he got things done. Can you imagine today going to the school board, how many meetings you would have? When he was in his 80s, he was attacked by a bull and badly broken up. He was carried into the house unconscious, where the doctor told the family there was no use trying to set the broken bones, as he could live but a day or so. At this, Steve aroused enough to damn the doctor and tell his son to get him to a hospital where there was somebody who knew something. It was done, and he recovered to live another 3 or 4 years. Shady Dell. We got plenty of pictures around. We got pictures up here. We got pictures over there. And Conrad Ham went there. Sally O'Brien, Martina Gray, Charlie Simonson, Nancy Haight Lundgren.
I didn't go there, I'm not a scientist.
Oh, okay, fine. Now, I don't know, Conrad Ham was going to be here tonight. There he is, good. Could I prevail upon you to tell us about the land and who owns it now, how the school got started?
Yeah, sure. It was originally part of the old farm.
where the land, where the school is. It was deeded to the school district in, what would you figure out, 1898 or 99, somewhere at that point. And the school is standing there, still was built just after that. However, there was a school there before that, when it was still a part of land owned by my family. So I'm very happy that the son now has possession of it. Because not only was it in the family prior to becoming in the school district, but my aunt was taught there, my dad went to school there, of course I went to school there, and so it's kind of a family thing. Okay, and I have fond memories of being there as a student for 6 years. So you know, I was just thinking one of the things that impressed me then and has since that time was during the World War II, a number of more wealthy families sent their children from England over here to the United States to get out of the way of the war. And 4 of those children came to the Shady Dell School. They were part of the Nelson family. Lord Nelson was quite well known in English history. Yeah. And so that was quite a thing, really. They came over here and went to our little one-room school. Yeah.
Okay, would you verify something for me? As I understood it, a new schoolhouse was built in 1899, and at that time, the state said the district had to own the land, and that's when your father sold them the land?
That's my understanding, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. It was my grandfather.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
What was your aunt's, which aunt was it? The talker.
Oh, is that my Aunt Alice?
And Allison,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Now, Mr. Whalen owned it. He put new shingles on about 7 or 8 years ago.
No, much longer than that.
Because, oh, it was?
Yeah.
10 years?
At least,
Because I thought I remember being here,
yeah,
and I've been back about 12 years. And,
I would say, maybe 10, 12.
yeah, because I remember looking at the shingles. Now that school, I don't know how many people know where Shady Dell Schoolhouse is. That is solid built. I think there was some money came from someplace around here to build it.
It's been very modern design.
Yes.
Because there are no windows on the north side, and all windows are in the south. So
Mhm.
it's solar heated.
Oh. I remember seeing one of the shingles off that it's about that thick at the end, like a board, tapered about 3 foot. Now, that means they had shingles that lasted 90 years. Now, the average asphalt shingle around here gets about 20, at least on the sunny side. So that was pretty good. It's a well-built school. Now, Sally, I got you on the list here. You could probably tell us something about that school.
Well, as I said, it was just the 2 houses. But the boys were well behaved.
Yeah?
Maybe we were formidable. But anyway, I remember there was one little boy, and that's when Miss Harris taught there, and he was very cute. And she'd let him do the blackboard. He'd throw the blackboard eraser up, and it would come down clean. And one day, she was leaning over, talking to a student, and he smacked her backside. And she took him out to the coat room. There was no noise out there or anything, but I didn't give it.
Nancy.
Yeah.
Yes, you have something, I think.
Okay. Well, my mother was taught at Shady Dell School. I don't know exactly what year, but I think she was there 2 years. She graduated from Dover High School in 1918. I know that. I went to normal school in Pine Plains. She didn't go to New Falls. She went up there, and I don't know if she did 1 year or 2 years there, but when she got out, she was a teacher. And her first job was in Lithgow School, and she had Louise Tompkins in her class. And then she moved down to Shady Dell, and taught there, but I think until she was married, which would have been like 3 or 4 years. But she claims to be have had the first the first hot lunch program in Dutchess County or New York State or North Carolina. She said that they used to, in the winter when it was really cold and the kids had to walk a long way to school, they cooked soup on the stove, and that would be one of the first things they do when they got in the morning is set the soup up to get it fermented. So,
I thought that would be service.
No,
well, I don't know.
no.
Oh, this was no hot plate that she had. It was right up, this was in the
Hot plate right in the front window.
yeah, in the 1920s, they cooked it on a wood stove. Yeah.
Charlie went there? Yeah.
One thing I remember is Halloween time when certain people from the village, boys, would come down Halloween and tip over the outhouses. It's happened every year.
Yeah.
The next day, when we went to school, any of the kids that had to use them couldn't, so they would have to come down to our house, which was just down the foot of the hill. So every day, until they were uprighted and fixed up, the kids were trekking back and forth from the school to our house for bathroom.
Anybody else got something before we go by?
Excuse me, we had the same thing with the bucket of water. We went next door to that White House,
Yeah.
and the kids used to fight over who was gonna go over and get the water, but we had a different too. But we did have a hot plate along the south windows, the row of windows, there was like a deck, and we had a hot plate on there and a big aluminum pot, and Miss Harris said, bring your chicken soup, so she heated up in the water. And then one time we had, remember Gordon McCallis? He was like half Indian.
Yeah.
Gordon's father. He came down and put a demonstration on here with his war bonds and all that, danced along that platform there. And I remember that just like it was yesterday.
Doris?
60 years ago.
You want to say something,
Yeah,
Doris?
all right. Well, my brother and my sister Janine and me all went there, and I was the youngest of the 3 of us, and so I don't remember the hot chicken soup and the baby jars right there. I don't remember that. But what I do remember is that I always was impressed it was an elegant school, and that had a player piano in there with the roll and everything. I love that.
Martina, you had something?
Yes, I don't know if people remember much about the gypsies or not, but I had to walk to school from up to Thorncrest, down to, in my home, down to school every morning. I get down to the birch lot, and what must be there but some gypsies. And I want to tell you, I was scared. So I go on down to school, and at night, when it's time for me to go home, I go very cautiously up that road. One day, I got through, started up the road. Holy smokes, there was about 4 of them standing there. And that was when Mr. Heinley was our teacher. Well, I, right about face, went back to the school, and I went with the Mr. Heinley, the Conover kid, small, and back across the lot, down across Ham's lot, and over across the creek, and up to the 44. I walked the rest of the way home. And then we always had to go down to Mrs. Clark's house. It was on the road going through to Burbank to get water for the school. And we had a nice library down there, and I would help Mrs. Haight. She was my first school teacher. And she was one of the best teachers I ever had. I really loved her. So she called me up one day to do some reading in my book. I looked at the book, I started in, she looked at me, she says, She said, I think your daddy has been reading to you. That's when we bought our home books. And I had memorized whole doggone thing.
Thank you very much.
I heard something about a skunk. Does anyone know a skunk story at Shaky Dell?
What, beg your pardon, what was that?
Skunk story. Skunk. Anybody want to own up to it?
And put under the school.
Okay, that'll come up later in another school, I would imagine. The next one, we go to Tower Hill School.
Stanley, I think Floyd Chagall has something.
Well,
Yeah, okay.
Lady mentioned the outhouses there. I remember my brother, Herbie, asked to go to be excused, and he went out. And he was supposed to be 15 minutes or so. And an hour went by, no Herbie. So he sent another brother out, got down there, and the old bull from down at the Hammond farm was standing right outside and wouldn't let him out. Someone down to the farm to get Mr. Hammond to come up and get his bull. Then everybody went back to school.
I've heard some good excuses.
That's
Next school, Tower Hill. When you start up Tower Hill, just a few yards, there used to be a schoolhouse. We never found out much about it except a newspaper item. I think I talked to Ted Briggs once, and he didn't recall his father going to it. Newspaper item. This group met for the year 1899, 1898, decided not to open the school for the coming year. No one wanted it open, no one wanted to be trustees, so they closed it. They allowed $3.12 to the family, Murphy family, so they could get their child to another school. Now, I don't know whether that's $3.12 a month or what it was. But you mentioned the schoolhouse got moved to someplace?
No, there was one at the end of, you know, you go off the Tower Hill Road and splits, one goes to Dover, one goes up the hill.
Yeah, North Tower Hill goes left.
Yeah, there was a school
Just
right there.
Yeah.
But that got bought, and it went up to a house, it took down someone's house.
Oh. Now that leads us into the next school, which is just beyond North Tower Hill, start down the hill. There's a schoolhouse there, and that was that joined a median.
Yeah, that was the one,
Yeah,
it's been moved.
okay, I wondered, I got pictures of it, and my father went there, and his father, and his grandfather.
Yeah.
And he said that, well, we got a picture somewhere of a Christmas tree in the
It's up there in
school.
the farm one stand behind it.
Okay, well, yeah. Here's the school teacher, that's about 1904, and there's a Christmas tree. My father said that they use real candles. And they would light the candles, then they would close all the shutters to make it dark inside, sing a few songs, and he was 6 foot when he was 12 years old. He towered all the rest of the kids, but his job was to sit up front with the water buckets and drink water. And they had a dipper, and they said, if the tree gets on fire, put it out. Well, have you ever seen a Christmas tree burn? Poof! I can see him with a dipper of water trying to get it out. He said, I don't know why they never burnt that schoolhouse down. One teacher that he had never missed a day, and I forget how many years. She lived to be 93. And I don't know if anybody else has anything about that Tower Hill School or not. It was partly in the median. Now, that schoolhouse is Overlook School. And that's where Altamont Road meets with Overlook Road. And that school,
I found it right behind you. The pictures of the inside are in the parlor.
oh, over here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the school sits on the knoll, and if you look at the building, there's 5 windows all in a row touching one another. So that gives you the hint that probably was a schoolhouse. And I went and I saw Tim Norell, and I invited him tonight. He didn't make it, but he was very polite. He invited myself and Jenny in, and the inside is just like stepping back 100 years. There was the inside. There's the windows. The wood goes up about 4 feet in the walls, and here's a corner where we assume when you were punished, you had to stand in that corner because there's some initials carved in. In the back, there's 2 closets, typical of a schoolhouse. They had a fireplace. The same floors there, everything about the same. You kept it that way. The only thing is, above the fireplace, I do not see a hole in the chimney or stovepipe. And it may have been covered up because it's hard to believe they would, for all those years, try to heat a school with a fireplace. As you know, they're very inefficient. Most of them had wood stoves with coal stoves in many cases. Anybody got any information on that?
I think Jim and Sheila Tolliday lived there.
I had, somebody just gave me a note. Mrs. Edie Gendrick from North Howard Hill lived there. Huh?
Audrey was there.
Oh, you went, yeah, okay. Can you tell us something about it all? That
I was talking with my sister last night, and she said that she can remember taking wood in there.
to the fireplace?
To
Maybe
the
they did stick with it.
school.
Yeah.
And she said the windows were on one side and the chalkboards were on the other side.
Yeah. I got pictures of the windows.
And I can't remember anything else much about it.
Well, the
But we
note
walked through Davison's woods to go
Oh,
home.
shortcut, yeah.
Because we weren't allowed on the road.
Well, one of the gentlemen here tonight gave me notes on it. He says it was closed in 1945. It had grades 1 through 6. He knew the Johnson family went there, Broadnack, Tim Boyce or Jim Boyce, and Dora. I think Dora. Look out. Of course, it's difficult to get a picture of it today because the fences in the way, but we do have a picture that someone sent.
Sally O'Brien.
Sally O'Brien, thank you. And then somebody sends a picture way back. There's nothing in front. There's no question that's the building. You can see the chimney when you look through the door. You know who sent that picture?
That was borrowed from the library.
Okay, so we know what it looked like way back, probably around 1900. Now, people went to that school. Must be some here.
Yeah, I went there for this year.
Yeah. Can you tell us something about it, Curtis?
No, not really, except I got an education.
Well, they didn't find you out very early, did they?
One guy went to do was like he was from the corner with a hat on.
Yeah. Well, Ted Reese went there, Paul Hydra.
But she's an exceptional teacher.
Yeah, that's good. I have something that Paul Heydrich and his cousin, Cutie Heydrich, they're in the same class. And they wrote something, they sat down and they got talking about it, about 10 pages. And it's very interesting. Obviously, I can't read it all to you. It's going to be up here. But I would like to just cover a couple of quick ones here. Okay, the first day she would introduce herself and say, "You may call me Aunt Sue or Mrs. Sackett." And Cutie says, "I can understand this. This is a rural school." Then she would call the roll and the child had to answer present. I thought the other kids were saying it incorrectly, as I had never heard the word. So I answered president, and everyone laughed. On arithmetic test, she marked one of my examples wrong. This is Cutie talk. I saw there was a flaw in the paper that made the number look other than what it was supposed to be. I went to the desk and told her, asked her to try to erase the mark, thus proving I was right. She refused and reprimanded me for trying such a shabby trick. I think she knew I was right, but wouldn't admit it. So then Paul writes, once I was called to the desk and she pointed to what looked like the wrong answer. She took her pencil and adjusted a 1 to make it a 7, saying, "This is what you meant, isn't it?" She did this in such a way that there was no mistaking that she was doing me a favor. Could there be a clearer example of favoritism? Welcome to me, but so unfair to the others. Punishment. Yeah, and I like this one. Punishments. The most common one was to be made to sit on a stool behind the stove. And then Cutie writes this one. I once had to sit on a little stool in the knee space of Mrs. Sackett's desk. Boys who were bad sometimes had to sit out in the coal bin. A few times when some kid was bad, they would be called up to the front of the room and she smacked their knuckles with a ruler. She would tell the child not to go home and tell their parents that she had hit their knuckles with a ruler because she really hadn't. She just showed them how it would feel if she did. So Paul writes in here, how can you argue with this logic? She showed us how to parse a sentence. I couldn't see the worth of it now. I couldn't see the worth of this, now or then. I can see that. Well, won't take any more time. So they did put plays on in Donaldson's Barn on Turkey Howl Road. I thought that was interesting. If anybody knows where Donaldson's Barn is.
Louise Tompkins' place.
Oh, is that right? Another year, Paul writes, I had no ideas for a costume. They're talking about Halloween. So at the last minute, borrowed an old dress from my sister, put on some lipstick, an eye mask, a kerchief, and went as a girl. When Ted and Andy Briggs discovered who it was, well, they sure didn't treat me like a lady. One last statement, he says. Paul says, I played hooky just once. I glued my eyes shut with the page's glue and told my mother I had a sty and couldn't go to school. It worked. Later, my sister turned informer and told my mom. Oddly, no one scolded me. I think they were amused. I couldn't do it again anyway. It was a one-shot deal. Yeah.
In fact, who came, can we see if they have anything to say? I can get a picture. From Babbittsville. No.
Oh, Mabbittsville. Yeah, we're still on Mabbittsville.
Oh, okay.
No, what do you want to know?
That's all right. Keep going. I thought you were going to go to another.
No.
Okay,
yes.
Sackett was my father's teacher. It was mine 30 years later. And I had Mrs. Sackett for 4 grades. And I went there during the Second World War, like in the 41, 42. And on Wednesday afternoons, Aunt Sue would make a big pot of weak tea. And Wednesday afternoons, we would sit, she would read to us, and we all learned how to knit, boys and girls, because we made little squares for the Red Cross blankets. And we all learned how to knit and purl. And Red Cross would come and pick up the squares that we made and then fix them into a blanket. And then springtime came, Aunt Sue would take us all out and teach us how to play baseball. And she would be the scorekeeper and manager and everything.
Yeah, Paul had mentioned that. The
Yeah.
little, you had to run uphill, downhill. Yeah, she was out there.
Yeah, she was a great person, yeah. We had a great time.
Now, Paul had mentioned knitting that, little
Yes,
squares,
yes.
except he kept going, his was 3 foot long.
Yeah, he made scarves.
Said the teacher was so good, you could keep it, use it as a scarf, rather than embarrass it. Somebody else.
I just wanted to ask a question. The little booklet that you were reading, the
Yeah.
reminiscences from, where can we buy copies? Or are there any?
Now, this is what Paul and,
Yes,
I was reading out of this little thing.
yes.
It's available up here to read.
No, I mean, there aren't any duplicates.
Let me ask him, Paul might just ask it to put in the archives. If I tell him people are interested in it, I'll get his permission to get copies of the deed.
He wants
A little
it.
money for our scholarship
Yeah.
fund.
That would be wonderful. I would love to do that. Yes, really good.
There's some very interesting things in here. Very interesting. Someone else. Harts Village. We have an 1890 register. And that's about all I have on it, except a newspaper. No. It was in a high school yearbook, I think. They said that all the people north of Franklin Avenue went to Harts Village. All the people south went to the South Millbrook School. Now, somebody has something on Harts Village?
Well, just the Arts Village closed fairly early because when Thorne Building opened in 1896, Arts Village and South Millbrook were incorporated and went to Thorne. So they were probably the earliest closing district schools.
Where was the one in Harts Village?
Enyo's. This, where
It's on
Enyo's
44,
garage.
remember that? Yeah.
Oh, it was on 44, oh, okay.
It was 44A.
Yep. Near the apple orchard.
Yep.
About
Right next to
1930,
it.
Stan, I think that went down about 1930. They tore it down.
They tore it down.
Yeah, tore it down 1930. But then when Siemens gas station owned it, that.
Okay, now we have a interesting school, Little Rest. It's on Route 343, about 3.5 miles above the South Millbrook Circle.
And for what we can find out, there's a school on the map. The map we used is 1667. There was a school, Mutton Hollow School. We don't find it, and what we have found out, the Mutton Hollow School was moved up to Little Rest.
Bucks Hollow School is on the right-hand side, just almost opposite the entrance to town dump.
Yeah, that's, he's talking about Carmine.
Yeah. Well, Mutton Hollow was just before you start up the hill to go into Dover. There was a school, and they moved it up, Dover.
Paul's Corner Road.
Yeah, right. And they moved that school up to where Carmine DiArpino, that's opposite Butts Hollow, you mentioned Butts Hollow. It's up on a little knoll there. And I don't know why they put it up the hill, but they did. And Carmine told me one day, he was rummaging around through there, and he found a note. It was from a parent excusing her child, and I don't know the name, I'll just say that so she wrote, "Please excuse Henry for not attending school Friday, as the snow was 20 inches deep and his legs are only 18 inches long." Now, there's something very interesting that I'd like to have you talk about, the teacher.
Some of you had Dorothy Harris Jacoby, she came, at Shady Dell. Before she taught there, she taught at the Little Rest School. She and her family used to live off Butts Hollow Road. They sold their land to Wigdale, and then they moved to Burbank Road, right near Shady Dell School. But she started teaching at Little Rest, 9 miles. She got a ride with her brother to South Millbrook, Four Corners, and then she walked from there, which she figured probably 4 miles. At the end of the day, she walked home. She figured 9 miles. And I said, 9 miles? She walked 9 miles? She said it was nice, in the fall, the trees are beautiful. But she found it a little bit scary because at that time, she taught there for 28 years. There were a lot of transients. Men were moving from town to town looking for work, and perhaps some of these gypsies might have been men who were looking for work.
Well, they used to have a lot in the county infirmary.
And the county infirmary, they go wandering. So she was warned not to stay after school. Once the children went, she was to start home. She said, that walk home was long because there wasn't that much traffic. But she taught there for 3 years. And I just noticed again in this attendance report, Stan, the Whalens went there, Mary and Robert Whalen. We both went to school with them. Some Bridges, Gardners. Anyone? Know anyone who went there? There was a Mrs. Irving who was here.
Yes, 2 people that I've talked to. One person I just spoke with the other day, Norm Morelli. I guess he went there, he said 5 years it was. And he used to walk 2 miles down the road from Chestnut Ridge down to Little Rest, and he'd go by the road. And he said if he timed it right in the morning, and he got out there when the milkman came to pick up the cans of milk from the farm next door, he could get a ride down 1 mile of the road, one stretch of the mile, and then he'd have to walk down 343 to the school. And then he also said, like everyone else is talking about getting the water, they would go across the road to the Stillings house, which is at Butts Hollow, I guess, that corner. And I guess he was the superintendent, he didn't know the exact title, but he was somehow the superintendent of the school, overseer. Sure. Yeah, maybe he was a trustee or something. And I guess someone in his family, I think a Stillings, had taught at Little Rest. Yes. So anyway, they would go from the Little Rest School over to the Stillings house to get their water and dole it out with Dipper and that sort of thing. And he also mentioned how they used to take their sleds and leave them there for the winter, and during lunch go up on the wood road, they would call it, up on the hill behind and go sledding. And I don't know, I guess that's all. He told me all about it. It was great fun. But it was Carmine's old house. That's what he called Little Rest.
Thank you. You got something? Mutton Hollow. No, Mutton. M-U-T-T-O. I have no idea where it is.
Stan, I just wanted to mention that without Mrs. Jacoby, Dorothy Harris Jacoby, we wouldn't have any pictures of it. We now have a picture of that building, and I just heard of it, never We just lucked into it.
I mean, the picture of Carmine's house,
Yeah.
way back.
Way back.
People in front,
The
kids in front of it.
Mutton House schools came the little ones.
Yeah, I can't help but imagine walking 9 miles, most of the school is in the winter. The sleet, the snow, and back in those days, there's no snow plows. And what little traffic, most people were farming, a few people went to work, so you have a horse's track and little narrow wheels. So she had to push through all that snow getting home, and it's dark when she got home. That's pretty harsh business. Well, I gotta get going faster here. South Millbrook. We have a picture, 1878, of the school. It closed in 1896 when the Thorn High School opened. And that's about all I got, unless somebody wants to add something.
I just have a little bit on that. There was a Judith Hicks Kelly who went to a private school. At first, Miss Behringer's, because it was too far for her to walk from Millbrook. She was on the south side of Plymouth, so she had to go to South Millbrook, which was Four Corners. And when she was old enough to walk and started walking there, her classmate was William C. Anderson. Some of you know that name, became principal. And the next year he was the teacher, and he taught there for several years. Every summer he went to school for his own education, and I guess eventually became principal at Thorn.
Where was that located?
40 years. And didn't this advance school 40 years? The
Yeah,
gospel
that's
according
right.
to the East.
You want to know where it was?
Yeah,
It's
was
on County House.
Oh, County House Road.
They moved it from one side to the other, but we found it.
Sort of a picture.
Okay, Burbank School, that's Joint District. They shared taxes. Susan Van Tassel, Margaret Fenner's mother, taught there, and Florence Haight. We have pictures from Audrey Dixon and Lydia Brown, so we had a chance to go way back to get some old pictures to see how they added to it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Mrs. Gendricks?
Mrs. Gendricks taught there.
Yes.
You went there.
Betty Lyle taught there, who was
Oh,
Chubby Wicker's
yeah, right.
mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law.
I had her from kindergarten through fourth grade, no, third grade. Then I had Aunt Sudie for fourth grade. Mrs. Gendricks fifth and sixth. And then in seventh grade, it was Miss Buchholz, and she lived with Willard Haight. And she was from Beacon, and she'd come home on weekends.
We had a pump. We didn't have to go to the neighbors for
Oh,
water.
yeah, really nice, yeah.
We used to ice the hill down in wintertime. It's like right.
Hibernia.
Get going and throw buckets of water out there.
Hibernia School, and that is on Canoe Hill, connects with Route 82, just about a few yards up is Hibernia School. That building is still there. We have pictures. There's 2 posts and the school bell still sticking out there. We got a lot of information from Helen Olson Harris. She said many were welfare kids living in foster homes during the Depression period. Anybody?
Is that the one on Woodstock Road? Woodstock still.
Well, what's you? Can I get a big
I thought you were talking about my house.
Yeah, I finally changed it, yeah. That's it, you have something?
I live in the old Hibernia Schoolhouse.
Oh.
I purchased it in 1992 as a single school teacher for Arlington, and thinking it would be a wonderful house for, it was all vinyl sided at that point, but it has the charm inside, and if you went to school there, I grabbed out of our photo album some pictures. There are some initials carved in the closet. I can see on our basement stairs that used to be where the stovepipe went. We lost the big maples in the front yard a couple of years ago, but that's Charlie Olson across the street has told us some of the history of the house and different things. So,
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we get to,
Stan, just one quick thing. Mrs. Fowler, Rosalind Fowler, gave us 3 or 4 registers from that school from the 1890s. And was it your father-in-law who was a trustee there? And your son went there and had Della Ross as a teacher? I didn't understand. Did your son go to the Hibernia school?
Yes, for first, second, and third grade.
First, second, and third?
and then they made their way to Millbrook. Thank you.
Okay, now we've got two schools left. One is North Mappesville School, that's between Mappesville and the Shunpike. We have a picture of that. I don't have much information on it, except some lady I talked to owned it, and it's well preserved. She says you look in the window, you can see the writing still on the blackboard. Anybody got information on this?
This is Wheeler owned it.
Yeah.
Sold out.
Well, they're keeping it well preserved, I think that's good.
She owned it previously. I'm not sure whether the new owners of the Nealon farm owns it or not. It was separated there.
Jane Geisler gave me a book, Robert Coffin's Journal. Robert Coffin lived there, I think it was a Brookside at that time. And I wanted to let the ladies go ahead to the kitchen and get the juice and bring it out with the wine. So Robert Coffin ran away to Wales. He wanted a better education. His father wouldn't give it to him. He was the son who would be the farmer. He went whaling. Eventually, he did get educated in his 50s in Minnesota, came back here and he taught school at that building, Martina, we were talking about, because your father went there. And in the book, very interesting book, they interviewed Mr. Curtis, Benjamin Curtis, and he said that when Mr. Coffin taught geography, they'd start out, 2 hours later he'd be talking about the Beachy Islands and all these other places he'd gone. And you had mentioned that the Coffins went there, the Curtises, and a couple of other families. The Hayes, and apparently was very active. I don't know when it was.
Pardon? I can't remember the name. I've been trying to think of the other party that went here because it was sort of a joke about that. I can't think of the guy's name, so.
Okay, we had an article, I don't know where it came from. Somebody interviewed a lady when she was, I believe, 95. The interview from a long time ago because she was born in 1840. We're going to have it up here. Just a couple of things that I found extremely interesting. It's sort of a biography. It tells you the type of person who would want to be a school teacher. She was on a farm. They got up 4 o'clock every morning. The young folks had to help before they went to school, or the people at home would never get the work done. And she said, we grew nearly everything we needed, so we did not need to spend money. The whole idea seemed to be to do without everything you could possibly do without. But anyway, she had a tough time, and then one morning she told her mother she wanted to do something else. Now they had their own sheep too, so they processed the wool, made all their own clothes, did all the butchering, made the butter and everything, and she said she wanted to do something else. But she told her mother, but I'll still get up at 4 o'clock every morning and do the chores. She wanted to be a teacher. And so parents sent her, she went to Connecticut. But she didn't go very long because she just turned 17 when she started to teach. But she did get up 4 o'clock every morning and do all the chores and then teach and then come home again. So that's kind of a tough job. And something I ran across was interesting. It talked about preserving food. She said, let's see. The thing that took most of the time was taking care of the food. That was a chore. When I was a child, the only way you had of keeping fruits and vegetables was to either bury them in the ground or dry them. Canning did not come into use until about 1850. Now you know the rest of the story. I often wondered, when did people start canning?
Stan, have you forgotten the little school at Listo?
No, that's the last one. That's the
What about Morris Mills?
Well, we were making town alarm, and we have some pictures from other ones, but if I didn't restrict it to this, you had something?
Yeah, I mentioned the school across the street from me, which is Falls Corners Road in 343.
Oh, that's the one we were looking for. Mutton Hollow. Paul's Corner is showing a place for schools. I couldn't find anything that looked like one. Tell us again.
Well, I know it's there, and unfortunately, I looked for a photograph that I took of it several years ago. The property has changed, and it's a little harder to see. He hasn't yet renovated and done too much to it. I've never actually been through it, but it was
It was owned by an Italian family that lived abroad for the longest time. She died very soon after I moved here about 12 years ago. And now it has been sold by that family to a neighbor across the street.
Well, I'll talk to you afterwards to find exactly where it is,
Yeah.
because.
Is that the house with
You can't miss it, it's right there on the corner of 343 and Paul's Corners Road.
Is it up on a knoll?
Yeah, it's on the,
right side after you go
West
by
side.
Paul's Corners, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
right there.
I still don't, okay.
So it was not moved, huh?
That means that it is not Carmine's house.
Right, it was not moved.
There was also a school, Little Rested South, right next to where Jamie House was, and I asked them about that, and it didn't mean anything to them. So it occurred to me that that might have been the school that was moved, but we still on this street. Stanley, before you wind up, I wanted to thank Alvin, someone brought in the bell.
Oh.
The wonderful bell. Oh, yes.
Yes, I did, yes.
From the Washington Howard School?
I'm not really sure where I got it from. It might have been a flea market years ago. I was just in the attic and
Boys,
taking stuff out.
really rings out.
Yes, it does. Yeah, thank you.
Just one other item before we get into Lithgow, which is the last school. I was telling about this woman born in 1843, so she was teaching in 1860. She lived at home, worked, so she had a room and board at home. She took care of it. The district paid her $2 a week. So that's all the district had to pay. And when you ask about how much the teachers make, it's so hard because you have to ask what year. There's so many different years, and where did she board? A lot of them boarded around 2 or 3 weeks. She mentioned in here they would spend, when asked about the custom of boarding around, Mrs. Miller explained that it was one way of reducing the school tax. The teachers' living expenses were deducted from what the farmer boarding her had to pay in school taxes. It wasn't as good as living at home, but it was interesting. You had a good chance to know the families of your pupils. You certainly knew them. Teachers only stayed a week or two in each house. So that gave everyone a chance to cut down his taxes. Okay, Lithgow. Louise Tompkins. If you want to know more about it, Mrs. Armstrong, how did they find out?
Oh, I got 2 chapters in the book. No, basically in the book Memories of Millbrook, those of you who read it, are Louise's experiences. And she talks about certain teachers like Margaret Flaherty, who seemed to be the sweetest lady in the world, who always said she had no bad children, but that was just her attitude. And then she talked about another lady who walked 8 miles to school every day. And there was a Arbor Day revolt. This is my favorite story, that's why I put it in the book. It seemed like Margaret Flaherty had always let the kids have an Arbor Day program. Did you guys ever have one? Yeah. And you planted a tree in there. It may not have lived because you didn't water it over the summer, but you planted a tree and then you got to go home for the rest of the day. Well, the new teacher came and she just said, well, we're not doing that this year. So the kids decided that they would have Arbor Day anyway. And they got to school early, and they all met, and then they went over, I think probably on the Baldwin place, and played in the woods. And they thought, gee, we're getting hungry. It must be about noon. So they ate their lunches. And then they thought, well, by now the teacher's given up and gone home. So they went back to school. It was 9:15. And I don't think any of the kids saw the playground until maybe like Flag Day.
Thank you very much. The information we have, in 1842, Cyrus Hammond deeded 1/4 of an acre for $50, providing the school must have a tight picket fence around it and it must be kept in good repair. Now, this Cyrus owned the Roseland Estate in Lithgow. His 2 sons attended that school. Must have been a good school. They went on to develop the Plaza and Murray hotels in New York City. Another note I have is Nancy Haight Lundgren's mother, Dorothy Birch, taught there and was Louise Tompkins' favorite teacher. Does anybody else have information on Lithgow they want to bring up? Well, thank you very much. We certainly appreciate it.
I have a question about a school. I don't know if it's in Washington or not. It's the site just east on Mildwood Road, down at the corner.
That would be town of Washington.
And right across from the Glade, the lower Glade, there's Glen, the lower Glen. I was told a long time ago that there was a school there. Does that ring a bell for you?
I tell
There's
you.
a little bit of a site of
After we break up, let's go up and look at that map and see if 1867 they had something marked there.
I don't think it's on the map, it's just east of this, of Geisler's,
Yeah.
what I'm talking about on the north side of the road.
Well, I want to thank you a lot because I was thinking about this. Information collected by historical societies on schools is pretty important because people, our generation, I'm 74 plus or minus a few years, I include a lot of you here. We're collecting this where I don't think the generation, for instance, our grandchildren would do it. We have parents that went there, a lot of us went there, we have aunts and uncles that went there. So we have all these conversations, we have a lot of information, we have a lot of data, a lot of pictures. The younger generation, say grandchildren, probably by they're old enough to have a conversation, will never talk to anyone who went to a one-room schoolhouse. Therefore, their interest in keeping anything would be nil. They would read about in the history book. And of course, our ancestors, this was one school room, was everyday business. They would see no reason to make a fuss and collect a lot of information. As far as they knew, that would probably be the way of getting your education forever. What else would you do? So thanks again for all this information.
One thing I want to add to that, the calendar series that we're doing that you all know,